Hi, my name is Rebecca Russell, and this is my presentation on finding aid development through user interaction. A little introduction to what I'm working on. So traditional finding aids are elitist and privilege the archivist, not the user. They continue to be used as an internal collections guide with the aid of a reference archivist. By prioritizing archival best practice, we distance ourselves from what users may require, because users are not as experienced with the format as professionals are. While archivists require an authority over the archive, the public deserves a certain amount of authority over public records and collective memory. And rather than viewing finding aid as a static professional tool, we must allow users to play a greater role of influence over the format and language to aid researchers as well as archivists. Some history of the finding aid as it was relevant to this project. Current finding aids have evolved from the needs of both municipal records and manuscript collections, which have required different arrangement and description. Manuscript collections have been tied to historical research from the very beginning, while municipal and administrative records have had to adapt their organization for researchers. Those municipal and administrative records very likely came out of a bureaucratic organization, which means that they weren't categorized the same way that manuscript collections were, and they're not as good for historical research purposes as far as organization goes. The finding aid, of course, serves as both the access tool for researchers, but a lot of times it's also used as a collection management tool for archivists, which can create a format and language that favors the archivist over the user. Current issues with the process as I see them. The archival finding aid is slower to adapt than the library catalog because of the unique values in them. Many institutions still use the card catalog as an initial means of access, like the Burton Historical Collection most familiarly. Digitized systems are not universal, and many times are seen as an added step rather than a necessary part of the description process. And these systems are rooted in tradition and practice and are slow to adapt to encourage innovation and user interaction. Archivists can no longer take for granted that there will be a reference archivist to provide mediation between the collection and the research question with resources that are increasingly online. So something I was reading about was archival authority. So authorship of finding aid can determine the functional access to the collection. And the authorship in this case, meaning the archivist that processed the collection and described it. The archivist maintains an authority through this mediation of the collection. This can mean the means of access becomes increasingly professional and hard to translate to users. And the process of description and arrangement may reflect the disparity. This is a quote from Elizabeth Yackel, who was one of my biggest sources when, writing the paper. This quote is that archivists should begin to think less in terms of a single definitive static arrangement and description process, but rather in terms of a continuous, relative fluid arrangements and descriptions as ongoing representation processes. Now, archival representation, as Yackel stated, and Ashley has done a lot of research on, are processes and structures that archivists create to represent original materials. These are access tools like guides, inventories, finding aids, and bibliographic records, but also systems that result from those activities like card catalogs, bibliographic databases, and EAD databases. Representations are increasingly found online, allowing users a greater range of access and more time to prepare without the assistance of a professional, which means that archivists must give way to allow this remote approach to access and help furnish the tools needed to make a successful path between the user and the archive. So the online finding aid. Many institutions have defaulted to using the traditional paper finding aid structure as a template for EAD encoding. Now, there are two competing forces at work here. Of course, there is the ease of access for the archivist and for experienced users taking the familiar paper format and just putting it online in a way that is better searchable. But by doing this, you lack the navigation and access possible in the digital environment, so you're not making the improvements you could. An example that Yackel worked on, actually, with Krauss, was the Polar Bear Expedition digital collection at Bentley Historical Library at U of M. And this particular system encourages users to search by subject, and they have a series of different subject terms that you can use. You know, individuals from the project, different military, sections and stuff. It places importance on link paths, which track where other users have been and how they have gotten there. And it's useful for the archive in understanding what people are looking for and how they're locating it, but it's also useful to the user in understanding the ways to move about the collection and how others have moved about the collection. So user interaction, some of the best ways to incorporate user interaction in archives that we are slow to pick up on, taking features from elsewhere online to help address the usability of finding aids. One of the recommendations made a couple times in the literature was like Amazon, the customers who also bought this item feature, which takes, your browsing patterns and acknowledges that there are other people who have browsed similar patterns and what you can learn from that information, which means that in an archive, if you're browsing for a certain document, maybe there can be some sort of interaction or algorithm that allows certain documents to be connected through the research of others. And on Facebook, of course, most familiarly, there's commenting, liking, and tagging. Being able to tag people within documents, being able to comment. In some cases, that's just going to be like, bad scan, take it again, which is, of course, helpful. Or, this isn't the person you think it is, it's actually a different person. But it could also allow, people experienced in a topic to acknowledge that, hey, maybe there's a different collection that has documents related to this person, or maybe, the context is just not correct. And this can be seen starting to happen on places like Ancestry, who of course has a lot more funding than most archives, but it is starting to be used in kind of a document context. Now, putting the user first, so some of the conclusions I've come to on how we can begin to go toward making these finding aids available to users ahead of archivists. Popular search term functionality, where it's just, straight up terms, rather than trying to use Library of Congress subject terms, which are normally what you find in finding aids. More collective description of materials to allow for greater access. And there are a couple reasons I talked about in my paper. Some of them are, archives are increasingly turning to make sure that we're recording the history of everyone. And unfortunately, everyone did not keep personal individual records. And so collectively, we have to have a bigger understanding of, Maltese immigrants that came to Detroit rather than individual immigrants that didn't have records of their own. Now, we have to prioritize intellectual over physical order within the finding aid. So rather than making it a strict, this is box 1, folder 1, box 2, folder 2 format, we have to try and show that these are the ways in which the actual records kind of connect to each other and go together. And we can't get bogged down in professional terminology and allow for more casual terms to avoid alienating users. You shouldn't need a master's degree to do research just because you need a master's degree to manage collections. And so sometimes it's hard to not get stuck in all the professional wording and professional formatting that we know, but that especially the increased number of kind of non-professional researchers that are coming into the archives will not understand. And we have to create pathways for users that allow them better access and interaction with the collection. We can't continue to assume that there will be a reference archivist there to translate. We have to start preparing the materials ahead of time to allow people to translate through what we have and how to access it in the context of those collections before they ever make it through the doors. So that's a little bit about finding aids and user interaction, how it needs to improve.